Hello everyone, my name is Alex and welcome to the Lord of the Rings Iceberg. This bad boy is pretty ginormous, so I'm going to throw it up on screen right about here. That way you can, take a look at it. So as you can see, it has multiple layers, but today I'm going to be going over just the first layer. The first layer, of course, is like surface level sort of stuff that everybody should know about the Lord of the Rings. It's kind of, if you've seen the movies once or twice, you probably know it already. I thought I'd go ahead and do it though. It's a nice little introductory into what it could be. Because like at the top, it's pretty normal. But as we get down here, it gets a little scary. Some stuff like Tarantino direction and stuff like that. But today we're going to look at stuff like Sindarin language and the Three Rings and stuff like that. If any of that interests you, I urge you to stick around and hang out with me for probably 30 minutes or so as I just nerd out and talk about Lord of the Rings stuff. So without further ado, thank you for watching and let's get into it. So the first one starts off with movie and book differences. This one's pretty obvious since, they can't drag everything from the book into the movie. But there are a ton of differences. A lot of them being character looks and stuff like that. But some of the ones that are widely known and I know of are like in the books, the Fellowship is aware of the orc ambush at Sangobir, but in the movie they're totally oblivious. They have no clue. But my favorite change is Frodo in the movie never time skips. So in the book, Frodo has Bilbo's birthday party and then he leaves. But after that, there's a couple months, I think, where he just doesn't do anything. He just hangs out at the house. In the movie, it's straight. They go straight into the adventure. Next up, we have Aragorn's height. So this man is a behemoth, apparently. I didn't know this until I had looked into it. He stands at a whopping 6'6", making him a humongous foe to go against. That puts him, I believe, at the height of some orcs and well above the Hobbits, seeing as they can only grow, I think the max is 4 feet. I believe he's even taller than Legolas canonically. Might be wrong about that though. This can probably be attributed to the fact that he is a Dunedain and a child of Numenor, and they normally tend to grow up pretty big. So up next is the Nameless Things. The Nameless Things were creatures that were said to dwell way deep down in the earth, way below Arda, so far that the dwarves couldn't even recognize them. They've never heard of them before. They are also said to be old gods that could have even been on Earth, Arda, for longer than Morgoth and the Valar, which would put them extremely old, seeing as the Valar were one of the first things to come to Arda. It's also kind of believed that the Watcher in the pool outside the Mines of Moria could have been a nameless thing. Some people say it is, some people say it's not, but no one really knows. And next we have Frodo's PTSD. This one is kind of never really stated. It's just kind of, you can see it through his character development through the book. So it obviously refers to the change in his mental ability after going on his journey. He never truly seems quite right after they finish, after they get back and they're taken by the eagles and Sam gets with his wife and Frodo returns to Bag End. He's never really the same. He always has some sort of thing up with him. That being, he was stabbed by the blade, but that's more of a physical thing. He talks about that in the book and in the movie about how it carries with him, He's always hurt by the mortal blade, but mentally he's also very odd. Like this sort of air of sorrow always follows him around, and this could probably be attributed to the fact that on his journey, most of his friends have died. Either that or they've gotten very badly injured and he's seen tons of death while he's been out. Seeing as he lost many of his close friends, he'd also gone through 148 days. That's the time span that it took from them to go to Bag End to Mount Doom and then back. He had gone through that many days in paranoia and fear, camping out in the middle of nowhere. He is a hobbit and they're used to being, in nature, but it's different whenever you're being hunted by orc. So up next is the Three Rings. Of course, they talk about multiple other rings in the books and movies. Like the 10 that go to the men, is it 9 that go to the dwarf? But in this tier, we're just going to be talking about the 3 that go to the elves. So this obviously refers to the 3 that were gifted to them by Anatar. With the help of Celebrimbor, I believe he helped them make the rings. He was kind of tricked into it. Anatar, of course, being another name for Sauron. I believe that was him in his elvish form. So the 3 rings were gifted to the elves. Those rings being Narya, the ruby-encrusted ring of fire, Nenya, the adamant ring of fire, also Nenya business, and Nilia, the sapphire emblazoned ring of air. All right, up next we have the fate of the characters after the Lord of the Rings and their return home. While many of the characters decide to stay in Middle-earth, multiple, such as like Frodo, Bilbo, Gandalf, Elrond, and Galadriel, leave to go to the Undying Land. Gimli, of course, travels to the Glittering Caves with his kinfolk. However, after the death of King Elisar, also known as Aragorn, him and Legolas take a boat to the Undying Land, Gimli being the first dwarf to ever enter the Undying Land. So up next we have Sindarin, and then we have Quenya. This refers to the language of the elves. Quenya being the formal language of the non-Telerin elves. These are the elves that have not made their pilgrimage to Valinor yet. On the other hand, Sindarin is kind of more of the common language. It's more simple. Most of the elves that you see in the movie and in the book are speaking this. I believe this is the same language that is on the One Ring too. I might be wrong. But this is the simplified version of Quenya. So it's almost like the formal version watered down, and then this is what is taught to most elves. And this is also the most widely spoken elf language in all of Middle-earth. This is also what is known as like Standard Elvish. All right, now we get into something a little bit more my speed. I can get down with this a little bit more. Up next, we have the Lord of the Rings Lego set. Come on. This, obviously, is talking about the absolute bangers that Lord of the Rings and Lego have put out. Like, look at these things. These things are insane. Look at this. I might have to buy this. If I was any richer, I would have this plastered on my walls. This is like one of the best Lego sets I think I've ever seen in my life. They really hit the mark on these. Like, especially with the Rivendell one. The Rivendell one is just beautiful. I could look at this thing for days. Keeping with the Lego theme, up next is the Lego video game. And this refers to the multiple, I think it's 3 Lego games, maybe, that Traveler's Tale had put out as Lord of the Rings. I personally haven't played these in probably about 12 years or so. They do hold a pretty strong nostalgic spot in my life though, seeing as like when I was like in it, I was in it. Same thing goes with like the OG Xbox Lord of the Rings. I think it was The Return of the King. Man, that was like morning, afternoon, night, come home from school, all I played. And from what I can remember, magical games. I loved them so much. Way better than whatever this is. Sorry, they kind of dropped the ball. What can I say? All right, up next we have the movie extended edition. So this refers to the like not theatrical cuts, but the extended edition that is mainly seen on DVDs. I believe now they have it on HBO Max. But let me say, these things are long. We're talking, I think they are 2 hours and 4 minutes, which is almost the same length of a whole nother Lord of the Rings movie. It does add a bunch of stuff to the movie though. Some stuff I wish they would have had in there theatrically, like one of the scenes called the Mouth of Sauron scene. You can see the Mouth of Sauron right out of the gate, and I believe Aragorn comes up to him and they have a slight back and forth, and then he ends up cutting off his head. This scene for me was like one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I could have watched this thing over and over and over, and if I do end up watching the extended edition, that's the only reason I watch it. I really wish they would have had that in there theatrically. All right, up next we have the thought of Sam having 13 children. This to me is crazy, but it's not that weird in the world of Arda. Hobbits tend to seem to kind of have a lot of children each time. It's kind of like a litter. Sam, however, I just can't see it in him. Him and Rosie must have gotten into it. But of course, we're talking about the 13 children of the Gamgees, also known as the Gardeners after the Fourth Age. I'm not sure why they changed their names. But in order from what we know most about to least, Most of these, I think we only really know something about one of them, that being Eleanor. And even then, it's kind of just speculation. I don't think there's a ton said about her. But going from top to bottom, we have Eleanor, Frodo, Rose, Merry, Pippin, Goldilocks, Hamfast, Daisy, Primrose, Bilbo, Robin, Tolman, and Ruby. So Sam kind of did the Twilight thing. The name every one of your kids after somebody that you know, which I have no problem with. I like the fact that he passed on the names to his kids. Just seems a little weird to me. So up next we have Christian influences. This is kind of blatant, I think, to me at least. It seems like every time I watch Lord of the Rings, it has very Christian undertones, which is fine. I really like it in the movie. J.R. himself being a devout Catholic, there's some, pretty obvious things like the ring and Frodo. Obviously, like, the battle between sin, what Frodo should do, if he should give in to sin, if he should not. And then Iluvatar versus Sauron, kind of a, godly and Hellion type thing. And J.R. himself being the Catholic that he is, even put out a statement in a letter saying that of course it was a Christian themed novel and trilogy. Even at first saying that it wasn't conscious to him that he was writing it, but in the revision of it and in the editing, it was very conscious to them, and they knew exactly what they were putting into it to make it seem kind of Christian-y. So up next we have Amazon shows. This obviously refers to the shows known as the Ring of Power. To me, it was kind of oddly received. Nobody really sat truly in the middle of like just liking it, I think. It was either people really liked it, and those were mainly people that I think kind of just like the video games and like the thought of Lord of the Rings. They really got into it, but the people that really hated it were like the book knowers, the people that got really into the Silmarillion and the appendices, stuff like that. And I thought, from what I've seen of it, it didn't look horrible. It looked kind of weird. But the reason this is Amazon didn't acquire like any of the rights to the movie, or the books, I should say. I think they got like 5% from that era of what they could use. So most of it is just kind of made up on the spot, and you can tell. Most people that like know of this era can really tell that they're just kind of throwing random stuff in to make it seem more Lord of the Ringsy. So up next we have War in the North, which surprisingly I had no clue about. So it's kind of like a hack and slash role-playing game. I kind of compare it to Dragon Age. Thing is, like, you run with a party of like a group of AI that normally help you, and I believe you can swap between them. I've only seen like very short gameplay of it, and I could never get my hands onto it since it's such an older game, and seeing as I've never played it. But it seems like you use this group and you go around fighting them Dragon's Age style. So the story of the game is you're pretty much chasing down a Black Numenorean prince, and the whole goal is to get to him and finish it, while Sauron himself is fighting against Gondor and like the main battles, I believe. Up next we have the characters' true appearances. This of course is obviously going to pop up, as there is no real Aragorn. You can't drag him straight from the book. However, I have to say, Viggo Mortensen played a perfect Aragorn for me. He was everything that I could have wanted in an Aragorn. And he was probably about as close as you could get as pulling a character out and putting him in a movie. That being said, there are multiple changes going from book to movie, such as Merry being way shorter than he is told to be. I'm pretty sure he's said to be around 4 feet, which is like the max that you can get, which is very tall for a hobbit. But in the book, he sits right at about the headline of everybody else, making him pretty normal. Along with this, the Eye of Sauron, in the book, it's kind of described as a like black nothingness hole, that like of a serpent. So like you could just see into it and there was just nothing. But in the movie, however, it's obviously like a big glowing orb. I'll throw up a picture right here. It's like a big glowing orb that has the slit, which is still snake-like, but it's not nothingness. Up next, we have Tom Bombadil. He's going to be something that I want to explore into later in another video, I believe, because there's just so much. Like, you could write hours and hours about this guy since he's just such an anomaly. He's kind of a weird character for the Tolkien Legendarium. He kind of exists outside of everything else that's happening. He's kind of just in a world of his own. seeing as like no one really knows who he is or what he is. There's a lot that has been stated about him and a lot that's like speculated, but no one has like a definite answer of what he is. There's also many times where he alludes to himself being way older than what could be possible, seeing as to most people he just looks like an old man. However, there are some claims that I think are made by him that even state him almost being as old as Arda being created. And it also places him coming way before the Valar, which is kind of crazy to think, seeing as they're one of the most like earliest things that have come. And that also means that he would have seen the light of the two trees, but he's never stated early on. Again, he's another person that I'd like to dig deeper into in another video. All right, so up next we have Lord of the Rings is an anti-war piece. This is kind of hard to see, but once you do see it, it's very blatant. The thing is, like, most of the battle scenes aren't focused on the fight itself. It's more focused on what is going to get out of the fight. Talking like even in The Hobbit, whenever they're having the Battle of Five Armies, Bilbo's knocked out for a large portion of it, missing most of the battle and just waking up to see the victory and who they'd lost. And it carries much more of like a solemn feeling rather than like we're in a war, like Narnia type of glory that comes with war. Even talking about like the Battle of Pelennor Fields, it's stated that Gandalf is more of a winner, winning through diplomatic diplomacy rather than everybody that's on the field fighting. However, there are a lot of like glory shots, I'd say, where they are fighting and it's very action-packed. Most of the time, it is focused on what comes after the battle and what is the fight for. And this could probably be attributed to J.R.R. himself being a World War I vet, seeing the horrors of war, not glorifying it to himself, more or less just stating what war would feel like and what it's for, rather than the glory of the fight. And even after the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, it is stated that most people turned away from war after that. They turned their backs and condemned the thought of fighting each other. Next, we have the "Fly, you fools" statement. This one could go either way. Some attribute it to like the meme. Others, it's more of like a real what the thought of it could be. I went with more what the thought would be. I might go into the meme later in the Iceberg, but more or less it refers to the moment of Gandalf being dragged down by the Balrog, and he's on the scene where he's holding himself, and as he gets pulled, he says, "Fly, you fools." Some people have attributed this to like meaning that he wants them to find the eagles, which kind of doesn't make sense to me. The eagles would have never agreed to it just for fun, and even if they were to get the eagles' help, they needed Gandalf to be there to speak to them. I, however, think it's more of like a knock to reality, seeing as like in the scene you can see most of the entire group is standing there staring at Gandalf. But Gandalf, however, sees like the wide scope of what they need to do, and he knows what happens whenever he dies. He already knows he's going to come back in some way. But seeing as he makes a statement, it seems to knock like the reality back into the characters, and you can see after he says it, I believe Aragorn grabs Frodo and they start running, which also gets into the etymology of, "Fly, you fools" means more not to literally fly, but to run. And then with this, he ultimately puts them from their scared state back onto the path to their quest, to the end of their quest. All right, and finally ending off layer 1 of the Iceberg, we're going to end with Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor. These are two games, put them out of order. It's technically Shadow of Mordor, then Shadow of War. And these were a couple of games that were made by Monolith Entertainment. I believe they made a couple of horror games before this too. And the first one, Shadow of Mordor, I actually had a little bit of experience with. I had gone over to my brother's one time and I had played on his Xbox, and I thought it was like mind-blowing. I was so young at the point that I had like no money. There was no way I was getting my hand on the game. But I thought it was like an amazing game. And I know some people said it was kind of undermade. I know Shadow of War kind of plays on what it had and builds it up a lot more. But to me though, Shadow of Mordor was like insane. It took everything that Return of the King, the video game, had gotten and just boosted it up there. So of course, in the game, the story is you play as Talion. His entire family had just been murdered by the armies of Sauron. And you have the ghost of Celebrimbor in you. I believe it's from the grief he enters you. And he gives you like sort of supernatural powers to help you fight. And it's kind of like a hack and slash roleplay type game where it's open world and you just kind of run around and you fight and kill Sauron's forces. I believe at the end you might fight a ring wraith. I'm not too sure about it though. I never made it to the end of the game. However, though, I never played the second one, so I don't really know a ton about it. I do know that it was like very well received though. From what I've read, it kind of just takes what was so good about Shadow of Mordor and then boosts it up and makes it into an even better game. I heard that some people said it felt like the finished version of Shadow of Mordor, and that it was kind of like what they thought they were getting into in the first place. But all in all, it seems to just be like a little bit of a bigger hit than the prequel, even though to me the prequel will always be, even if I were to play Shadow of War, I think the prequel would always just feel better to me. And with that, we are going to round off the first tier of the Lord of the Rings Iceberg. I had a ton of fun making this. I really love Lord of the Rings, and I think the deeper that we get into it, the better I think it's going to be. Seeing as like, once you get to the bottom, it's going to be like esoteric, random, just crazy stuff that you can kind of dig your way into, and it'll be like a rabbit hole almost. I also plan on making more videos on some of the topics that are on here, like Tom Bombadil, and then I also kind of want to make one about the Tarantino, because it's just such a wild thing to think of. But anyways, I'm glad you stuck around and heard me ramble for probably 20 minutes or so. It really does mean a lot to me. And keep an eye out for the second tier, which should be coming up rather soon. I really love writing for these things, so it's something I love doing in my free time now. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.